for joining. Again, for those that are just jumping on, my name is Joey and I'm from Lexar. Really excited to have Lexar Elite Photographer Jamey Price with us today. I also thank you to Adorama again for hosting this amazing event with all of you all. Again, really excited to have Jamey Price, Lexar Elite Photographer. I've actually had the opportunity to know Jamey since 2015. Gosh, dating myself here, but since 2015, where he's been one of our Lexar Elite photographers with us. Jamey is a motorsport photographer, shooting all things loud and fast motorsports from Daytona 24 to F1. He's also the Lamborghini team photographer. And today he'll be teaching us how to shoot epic motorsport photography and really give us an insight look, how he creates his images, what his workflow looks like, and the gear that he uses and trusts to make it all happen. Without further ado, Jamey, welcome.
Thanks, Joey. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah. Again, thank you for joining us. I know you just came back from the Daytona 24-hour, where for 24 hours straight, you were taking photos.
Yeah, it was a really long day, and actually it was more like 31 hours because obviously we don't wake up and start shooting when the race starts or when the race ends. There's a whole lot of time before the race starts and a couple hours after the race ends. So I was working for about 31 hours and awake for about 39 hours.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I think
a long day.
Yeah, I think everyone sees the glamorous, beautiful edited photos on Instagram, but they don't really get a chance to see the magic that goes on behind the scenes. Long days and sleepless days, and it's a grind. So I think this is a really cool opportunity for really not just photographers and videographers, but I think the overall motorsport community is just really stoked to have you here and get an insight look into your photography, your workflow, and sort of the magic that makes it all come to life.
Yeah, and I really want to thank Adorama and you and Lexar for this. And I know we've got some giveaways at the end, so make sure you scroll down to the bottom of the chat box and enter your name and email to get entered in those. I can't remember what are we giving away?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Yeah, so right before we get started, just wanted to remind everyone we are having a raffle, Lexar prizes, and you'll find the form down on the bottom of the page, and you basically just simply fill that out. And Adorama will be selecting winners tomorrow, but we'll be giving away a handful of prizes, from a CF Express Type B card, CF Express reader, a 1 terabyte SL200 portable SSD, as well as a 2000X SD card and a 1066 micro SD card. So there's tons of great prizes. We also have promotions running on now at Adorama, and you'll find those down as well in the bottom of the page if you keep scrolling. But we'll remind everyone towards the end as well. But without further ado, Jamey, feel free to take it away.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate it. And so obviously I'm Jamey Price. I have honestly have the honor of working with some of the biggest brands in the automotive and motorsport world. These are kind of the highlights. Obviously Lamborghini, they're very close to my heart. I've also worked with the other Italian squad, Ferrari, done a little bit for Red Bull, a little bit for Ford, done a lot for Aston Martin Racing, a couple of F1 teams along the way, which they've changed names a couple times. And then I've worked with the Toyota Gazoo Racing team as an assistant team photographer for them a couple times. So I have the best job on earth. It's like Joey said, it's a lot of hard work, but I adore my job. And I'm really excited that all of you are here. It's an honor. So thank you all for joining. Before we kind of get started, a lot of you are coming from my social media. If you don't follow me on social media, all my handles are at Jamey Price Photo, but really what I'm very proud of is every single picture and post I make has full camera settings and EXIF data on it. So if you ever wanted to know what I shoot or what shutter speed and aperture I'm shooting it at, I'm not hiding anything. I'm not hiding anything in the edits. That it is exactly what it is. And I tell you what it is. So hopefully you can kind of learn from me as I go to races, and you get to go to races with me. So it's something I'm pretty proud of. To kind of jump into my gear, this is pretty much my every track camera kit. So I have two D5 full frame bodies, which are, you know, Nikon's top of the line sports model. It's not the most recent generation. That's the D6, but I shoot on a D5 and I absolutely adore it. As far as lenses go, I have everything from a super long telephoto 500 millimeter, 70 to 200 millimeter, 24 to 70, 14 to 24, and then a whole variety of prime lenses. And all of that I use at various different times during my day or during my weekend. Obviously, I don't have it all on me at the same time because I only have so many cameras and so many hands and so many pockets to put them in. But I kind of pick and choose when I'm wanting to do what. But I always have some version of this kit on me. And then obviously I have a full arsenal of Lexar CF Express B cards. I was previously shooting the Lexar XQD cards, and it's awesome to be shooting on the CF Express cards because they're pretty freaking fast. And then obviously the SSD. And I use a little bit of, I don't always use them, but the Polar Pro circular polarizers and ND filters, and all of my camera gear goes in a Tenba rolling bag, which goes in an overhead bin of the airplane because I don't trust the airline baggage handlers. So yeah. And jump in, Joey, if there's any questions in the chat. We'll kind of roll through this. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background on me. So I was given my first camera in 2008. And at the time I was a horse racing jockey. I was also a collegiate swimmer for all 4 years of college. So I would just started by taking my camera to the horse races I was riding in, but also the swimming events that I was in, and just kind of started learning how photography works. I'm not super proud of the first pictures I took, but it was a great learning experience. And then I just kind of slowly started transitioning into stuff that moves a little bit faster, where I was going to track days, didn't have any credentials, you know, went to lawnmower racing in North Carolina, some dirt track racing in Kentucky and North Carolina. It was truly like where I learned photography of cars. Kind of fast forward a couple of years, I got my first motorsport credential to a professional car race, which was the NASCAR truck race, which Kimi Räikkönen was driving in, which was his first NASCAR race in 2011. And then got my first Formula One test session credential in 2012 and covered the United States Grand Prix in November 2012. And then 2013 was a pretty pivotal year for me as a photographer. I landed the job of the Lamborghini Super Trofeo Series photographer that year. And I've been with Lamborghini ever since. So, you know, going on quite a few years now. And then I became a full-time photographer, no other form of income in 2014. I made the jump and just figured it was really time to kind of step off the plank and try and make a go of it. And then 2015 became a Lexar Elite artist and have had Lexar support since then. And then last year I was named the National Motorsports Press Association Motorsport Photographer of the Year, which was a huge honor. It was some amazing photography in that competition. And it was truly a shock to win it because I liked the pictures that I submitted, but I didn't think they were, you know, portfolio winning set, but it was pretty awesome to have that honor. So kind of rolling through some of the events that I've covered before I teach you how to go about and take cool motorsport pictures. I've done a little bit of everything, literally everything. I feel like I've shot most kinds of car racing and sporting events on earth, but really the highlights would be horse racing. And that is actually not a picture I've taken. That's a picture of me in the pink on the left. So that's really where I started my career. Horse racing, it was really just one of the things that just taught me so much about photography and about portraiture and about candid portraiture and about covering an event and telling stories, you know, setting up remotes and just being in the thick of the action to make sure that the people that were viewing the pictures felt like they were there. And that's that horse racing is an unbelievable sport. It's exactly like car racing was, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It still is just like that. So it's really where I cut my teeth as a photographer and made images that I'm proud of. And then, of course, Formula One, done almost 40 Grand Prix at this point, starting in 2012. And the last one I covered was in 2019. Obviously, I didn't do anything last year thanks to COVID restrictions. Sports car racing, NHRA was one of the craziest things I've ever covered. MotoGP, I've had the pleasure of shooting one MotoGP race. Done a lot of NASCAR. Being from Charlotte, North Carolina, NASCAR is kind of the home sport for me. But I've done a lot of NASCAR in my career, and I actually really enjoy it a lot. I've done quite a bit of IndyCar, including the Indy 500. And then I was the assistant team photographer for the Carolina Panthers in 2017. But I've also covered quite a few games just editorially outside of that. So to kind of keep rolling here, really these are the basics of what I want to teach you guys about motorsport photography, and what the real bread and butter for me is the biggest thing for me is composition, and knowing exactly how you want to frame your picture when you stand at a corner, knowing what you're looking at and how you want to put that picture together, because it's like a recipe for what you're cooking in the kitchen. You can have all the ingredients, but if you put it together in the wrong way, it can be, not a really nice dish. It can just be, ingredients put together in not a nice way. Whereas if you put them together in a really nice way, it can be the best thing in the world. So composition is really important. Obviously, understanding your camera is a huge part of photography. Having it in aperture priority or shutter priority doesn't really teach you a whole lot. Letting the camera do the work. So most of the time I'm shooting in manual, not always, but most of the time I'm shooting in manual, and understanding exactly what your camera is doing to read the world, read light, shadows and highlights, those kind of things is really important. Shutter speed obviously is very important. So yeah, understanding your camera. Showing motion, because obviously I'm covering car racing, and the thing everyone knows about car racing is the cars and bikes and horses or whatever it is you're shooting is moving fast. So you have to be able to show that they're moving fast, but also knowing when to use faster shutter speeds and slower shutter speeds. It's a real balance, but understanding how to show that a car is moving is important. Playing with light, I'm very lucky that I cover a lot of sports car racing, like the Rolex 24, where you get two entire, circles of the clock, twice around the clock, and you get a sunset and a sunrise and everything in between. So being able to shoot backlit and shoot in harsh light is really important to being a motorsport photographer, and knowing what to do when the light is really nice or not nice. All those things are important. Of course, telling stories is what I was taught, because a lot of my background was in newspaper photography. So, as a newspaper photographer, you're not just out there taking a picture. You have to tell a story for the newspaper, or tell a story for the website. And that has really translated over to me and my clients, because they want me to be able to tell the story of a race weekend, not just shooting a race car, but the mechanics, the fans, the atmosphere, all of it is really important. So learning to tell stories is a big part of being a motorsport photographer, and something I think a lot of people don't do enough of, especially as amateur photographers that want to become professional photographers. It's not all about race cars. And then, of course, the thing that really leads Lexar into this is my speed and workflow, and how I'm having to work with images. Is hugely important. My clients are needing pictures very quickly, so being able to shoot and ingest and edit and then get back out and shoot again is really, really, really a big part of my job. And then obviously, how to become a motorsport photographer. I get asked this question several times a day. The answer is always the same, but I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of insight into that with some tips toward the end of this talk.
Hey, Jamey.
Anything to jump in with?
Yeah, we have a ton of questions, so just wanted to get over a few over to you before they start to really pile up here. But one person asked, how do you handle noise in night racing? You know, sometimes especially with the 24-hour races, you're shooting literally through the middle of the night, and you know, I would guess at some critical areas of the course, you're in 100% complete darkness. The only thing illuminating the scene would be the headlights and taillights and the brake lights.
Yeah, that's a
Any
great
tips on
question.
any tips on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to approach that. Honestly, and I don't want to lean on this because it's not cheating, but it is just part of digital photography. Is we're not shooting on film anymore. I mean, there are people that shoot on film, but on my D5 I can crank the ISO to 10, 12,000, and it's very it's not that noisy. It's very savable. This past weekend I was shooting portraits of Jimmy Johnson sitting in his car, and I accidentally, I mean, yes, professional photographers make mistakes as well, but I accidentally had the ISO at like 10,500 or something, and I realized my mistake after the fact, and put it into Lightroom, and did a little noise reduction, and you'd never know that it was ISO 10,500. The other thing you can do is using as much ambient light as you can. So either be it from the race cars themselves, the headlights, or you go to a corner on track where there is a light, some available light, whether it's a big generator, construction light thing that they have on an apex of a corner, because a lot of the corners do have a little bit of ambient light, but not all tracks do have that. I mean, if you go to the Nordschleife or you go to Spa and you walk around at 2 or 3 a.m., there is absolutely no light. So you either need to use a really slow shutter speed, or you do really long exposures because you can't really shoot the cars. And that's what I ended up doing during the 24 hours of Nürburgring a couple of years ago, was just doing long exposures all night long. And I didn't shoot a single picture of a car where you could tell what car it is. I just went around to different parts of the track and did long exposures.
Wow.
And it was great.
Yeah, that's great. Another person asked and I think you might touch on this a little later, but we're getting a ton of these. So how do you get motorsport credentials? How do you get that sort of access?
We'll touch on that a little bit later. I mean, it's kind of a broad question, but let's hit that one at the end.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So kind of going through the basics of motorsport composition, and I want to reiterate what's at the bottom of this screen, is that all of these things apply to all forms of photography. It doesn't matter if you're shooting portraits, or you're shooting food, or you're shooting race cars, or you're shooting landscapes. It doesn't matter. For me, these are kind of like the biggest things that make a good photograph a good photograph. And that's the rule of thirds, leading lines, and clean backgrounds. And I don't want to go into too much about what each of them is. Feel free to Google it, but to really lay it down really simply, is these are the three things that make my pictures what I think a good picture. And I'm using not just one, but probably two or all three of them in each single picture. So I'm using the rule of thirds to line the subject up in one of the thirds of the picture, leading lines with apexes, even if it's grandstands or light poles, stuff that's not distracting but can lead your eye to the subject. And then obviously clean backgrounds. Racetracks are notorious for having hundreds and hundreds of porta potties all over the place, and porta potties are never a nice pretty color. They're usually like a jarring color of green or blue, and it's always going to look like a porta potty. And so stuff like that, I'm always trying to keep it out of my backgrounds. If you don't like your background, move. That's one of the biggest things that I can really push on you, is to make your clean backgrounds clean. And that it sometimes involves just raising or lowering your position like a couple inches. You can eliminate a lot of stuff just by changing your perspective a little bit, or going to the left or right just a little bit. It doesn't always mean a huge move to another corner. Sometimes it does, But, you know, as we go through these pictures that I'm going to show, I'll kind of talk a little bit about each, but really it's all the same principles, you know, using rule of thirds for this picture of the Toyota, the subject being the lollipop guy, you know, and knowing, for me, a lot of what motorsport is about is knowing exactly what's happening and what is going to happen when. And I've worked so many times with this team. I know exactly when the lollipop guy flips it over and then raises the lollipop up. I know that that car is about to, you know, scream out of the pits, and I know that when he raises it up, it's going to be a great picture with him silhouetted. So I kind of just put the camera on the ground, made as clean a background as I could by doing that. Because if I stood at eye height, this is a really dirty picture with a lot of other, you know, junk in the background, lights, cars, stuff like that. And it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted it to be mainly about the car and the lollipop guy. Clean backgrounds, leading lines, using the light to your advantage. And I also have put the camera settings in each of these pictures so that you guys can see what I was doing. This is a pretty long focal length, 500 millimeter, but my buddy Corey Lewis, the sun's right in his eyes. And I knew that this would be a nice picture when the sun got to a certain point and really blacked out the background, which is just Rolex banners. But if I underexposed it and the car hits that sunspot as he's leaving this corner, you know, it becomes a really nice clean picture with flags, and it's got more atmospheric feel to it. Again, clean backgrounds. This one isn't so much of a rule of thirds thing, but you know, trying to keep it as nice and crisp and clean as possible, isolating your subject, not distracting people from what your subject is. You don't want so much going on in the background that you can't tell what's going on, or your eye has to wander too far to find the subject. And really that's how art is. That's how most of the great paintings, it leads your eye toward a subject just by not having anywhere else to go. Same thing, clean backgrounds, rule of thirds. Darren, you know, looking through the mirror and focusing on his eyes with all the bokeh at night at Daytona last week was just kind of a pretty easy picture to make, and something that he really enjoyed a lot. I think he posted it on his story. Any other questions that we need to tackle?
No, you're doing great. We're actually saving them. That way we can tackle them a little closer to the end. Because I know we have a ton of great information and content coming up. I think some of them will get answered. So we'll save those other ones a little bit towards the end. But if anything burning comes up, I'll jump in.
All right, sounds good. Obviously, so this being the most important thing that we can really highlight with motorsport photography is shutter speed. I had somebody email me or DM me recently that they've been shooting photography and going to racetracks for 25 years with a camera, and he'd never thought to take the shutter speed lower than, you know, a 60th. And to me, that just blows my mind, because shutter speed is the thing I enjoy most about shooting race cars. You know, you're having to put a skill together and practice it, and it really separates the pros from the Joes, if that makes sense. You know, I see a lot of pictures of race cars that people will send me where it's just a car frozen on track, and that doesn't tell the story that the car is racing. It's just a car frozen on a racetrack. There are times and places where you should freeze a car on the racetrack, but generally, if you can see the tire manufacturer, so if you can see that it's a Michelin or Pirelli or a Goodyear or whatever it is, Dunlop, you need to be panning it, and that means shooting at like under, you know, 1/200th to really start showing that it's moving. And you know, don't be afraid to kind of experiment and be a scientist. So like, I'm kind of jumping around to the bottom here, but you know, go crazy with your shutter speeds during a 24-hour race. Go nuts. You've got 24 hours to mess it up, and that's really the joy in motorsport photography, is being able to experiment and practice. And you can do it at all different types of corners, where different types of speeds. You know, panning is an art, and it takes a lot of practice. And I see a lot of those comments in my Instagram comments, like, how do you shoot this car? Like, how is it this sharp at, you know, 1/10 of a second or 1/15th of a second? And the answer is I do this every single weekend, all weekend long. And it becomes second nature to me. And I also know where to go and where not to go because I've done it a bunch. But really the biggest thing is to practice, practice, practice. And don't be afraid to use some crazy slow shutter speeds because you never know what you're going to get. That's one of the ways to really make those clean backgrounds clean, is to use a slow shutter speed, because what is really dirty and kind of messy with lots of junk in the back, you can really make it really cool with colors and leading lines, and you just never know what you're going to get when you use some really slow shutter speeds. And I'm not talking about a 60th or a 50th. I'm talking like 15th, 10th, half second, second. Really go nuts. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot easier than you think it is. So don't be afraid to give it a try. Even on long lenses, I have people say like, surely you can't pan with a long lens. And I was like, well, why not? It's just a lens. And this is a good example. This is just a really tight photo of Lewis Hamilton at a fifth of a second. And it kind of turns it into a blurry art, but you can still very much read the sponsors. It's sharp. We'd call this panning sharp. If it was a 1/1000th of a second or 2,000th of a second, you'd want it razor sharp on his helmet, but it is razor sharp on his helmet. It's just a fifth of a second. So, don't be afraid to experiment with your long lenses on details. You never know what you're going to get. It's really one of the things that I enjoy most. There's so many different ways to shoot every single corner because you have almost unlimited shutter speeds and apertures to play with. And also finding, backgrounds that kind of make the subject pop with a little bit of backlight highlighting. You get almost a little star filter. This was actually, and I'm going to note this a couple times throughout this, but this was shot through a fence. So this is not with a photo hole. This is kneeling down, shot through a fence. The bottom kind of highlight layer is actually a tire wall that's backlit and being a little bit reflected into my lens. So, just because there's a fence in your way, don't use that as an excuse for like, well, I guess I shouldn't stand here and shoot this. In fact, I think this might have been through a fence too, because, at a fifth of a second at 500 millimeter, that fence isn't going to be there. And same with this at 200 millimeter, 25th of a second, you can't see the fence. And I promise you, there was no photo hole when I took this. It was just kneeling down in the sand at Daytona last week, shooting through the fence.
So Jamey, for those that are new to shooting through fences, is it mostly just a lot of trial and error, or is there some sort of baseline? Obviously, it's really dependent on how fast those cars are moving. But
yeah,
is any sort of like rule of thumb as to when you start to see that fence go away when you're panning?
So it depends on the light. It's there's just a lot of variables. If there's a fence in your way, one of the best things you can do is to really stop the aperture down. So if you've got a prime lens, open it up as wide as you can. Go to f4 or f2.8 or whatever you can get, and also get as close to the fence as you can, because if you almost look at it like it's your finger, if you hold your finger out here in front of your face, your finger is very clear. If you put your finger right between your eyes, it's still, it's still there, but it's not as noticeable. So if you get as close to the fence as you can and use as wide an aperture as you can, that fence really does disappear. But unfortunately, at the wrong times of day, the fence will kind of highlight a little bit. You can see a little bit of the fence. So zooming in as far as you can using a really wide aperture will help a lot. There's only so much you can do, and if that doesn't work, then go really stupid slow with your pans. I mean, you can't see a fence in this. I think the only way you'd actually know that there's a fence here is because the highlights on the car are creating kind of a starburst filter, and that's without a starburst filter. The fence kind of naturally does that. There's another picture that I'll show coming up here that does show, a little bit of fence, but you only really know it's there because it kind of highlights with a star filter effect when you're shooting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think for a lot of these photos, you can't even notice it. So it's a really cool tip that people can take away. and something that,
Yeah.
they could practice outside of the track, right? There's fences everywhere, and try to
Yep.
capture some fast moving movements and test it locally, and then take what you
Yep.
learn over to the track.
And this doesn't just work for race cars. I mean, if you've got kids that are shooting, little league t-ball or Pop Warner or whatever it is, and there's a chain link fence in your way, like that, it's the same principle that applies. If you get as close as you can to that fence and shoot as wide an aperture as you can, where it's really, really open and letting all the light and depth of field come in, it does the same thing. The fence disappears. I will say that huge, advantage to those of you in the United States, and in some cases in Europe too, but we're very lucky that in the United States, especially at IMSA WeatherTech races and a lot of the IndyCar races, we don't have that many catch fences. There's not a lot of catch fences. So where you are as a fan is only 5 or 6 or 10 feet behind where I am. For instance, at Daytona, a small 2 or 3 foot step ladder would get you over the fence if you wanted to shoot over the fence, or you just shoot through the fence, and shooting through that one fence, there's nothing in front of that. Because where I'm standing in some of these places, there's no catch fence. So it's just an Armco barrier that's knee high, if that. This particular photo is from the Sebring 12-hour in a spot that most fans are very well acquainted with, and there's no catch fence for either of us. So, the cars are coming screaming in, and you don't have anything that separates you from me and where I can stand except for a couple of feet. So, being able to go to races and shoot without a catch fence in front of you is very possible in the United States. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, those of you that are diehard wanting to go shoot pictures of Formula One races, you're going to be in for a huge disappointment, because Formula One is the pinnacle of safety, but also that means pushing the fans as far back as they can, because they don't want the race cars to mix and mingle with the fans. So, fortunately, we haven't had too many issues with race cars interacting with fans, if that makes sense, to put it kind of lightly, with IMSA races. But, there's not a lot there to protect you, which, to be perfectly honest, which is great for photography. There are places in the world where there's a lot more catch fences. I get a lot of people asking me questions about shooting at Circuit of the Americas. Yes, it is possible to take great fan pictures at Circuit of the Americas, but you're also going to be really far back from the track, and there's going to be a huge 20-foot catch fence between you and the track, if not 2 of them. So, places like Sebring, Daytona, Mid-Ohio, Virginia International Raceway, Watkins Glen, those places that IMSA and IndyCar go to, we don't have those problems. We don't have those catch fences. You just have a chain link fence that's waist high, if that. And again, this is kind of a good example of, using crazy slow shutter speeds. This is handheld at a half second, just kind of following the car. And it produces some really crazy effects. It does not always work. This is just one of those things that's a practice. You could stand here for 30 minutes and get just a handful of images. I was fairly lucky that I nailed my client and a couple other clients, but that's part of it, is just standing trackside and experimenting and having fun, because this picture is a very different picture at 1/50th of a second, but it's sharp at a half second. So in this particular case, they didn't really care about seeing the sponsors. They just wanted to see the car, and the team loved it. So it ends up working out for everybody. This was the one that I was kind of talking about. This is through a fence at Mid-Ohio. There's no photo hole. I'm just panning at a 30th of a second, backlit, which helps a lot to make that fence kind of disappear. It's underexposed a little bit too, but I'm not shooting through a photo hole. So again, don't use, oh man, I've got a fence in the way, I can't make pretty pictures, better go somewhere else or just hang it up. Don't use that as an excuse to not make pretty pictures. Leading lines. This is pretty much the definition of leading lines, and clean backgrounds. This was from a hotel or a balcony above the Monaco Grand Prix street circuit. And not a crazy shutter speed. It was 1/100th. It's a really hard pan because they are really, really, really moving when they come past you right here, and it's almost straight down. So you're kind of bumping your elbows along the wall as the car comes past you. So not every one of them is sharp. This is pretty sharp. It's not razor sharp, but it's pretty sharp. But one of the ones that I'm most proud of, but a very good, kind of technique, classroom type thing for leading lines, which, there's nothing else in this picture except for this line that leads your eye straight to the subject. This is kind of a good one that illustrates a higher shutter speed example. So it doesn't always have to be panning. And if you can't see that the tire manufacturer, so in this case, this would be Michelin, you can't see the rims, you can't see the tire wall. So it doesn't really matter what your shutter speed is. I get questions all the time when I've got, the shutter speed at 1/8,000 in the middle of the day, and they're like, why is your shutter speed so high? And it's like, well, why does it matter? Like the picture's exposed, the picture's sharp. It doesn't matter what the shutter speed is. It could be between 1/800th and 1/8000th. As long as it's exposed and it's sharp, it really does not matter what the shutter speed is. This is also a good example of somewhere that you could use a slower shutter speed. I've shot this exact same corner where the cars, you can shoot them at a 30th or a 40th of a second, and it becomes a completely different picture. So this is one where you could stand in this spot for 30 or 40 minutes and get tons of different types of options and never have the same picture. It just is all about being really smooth with your pans, really, confident with your pans, balanced, but also finding the right angle, clean backgrounds as much as you can, with an f4 aperture. And this is one of my favorite pictures. Also one of those pictures that I got one picture sharp from about 5 minutes standing here trying to do this, and it just so happened to be Lewis Hamilton. But cranking that shutter speed down to a 15th, you can shoot this spot at 1/8000th, and it's a cool picture still. I mean, they're really close to you, but if you crank it to 1/15th and really try and whip pan it almost, because they're moving at about 110 miles an hour here. This is the Wall of Champions in Canada, and trying everything that I could to really focus my eye on Lewis's helmet as he came by me, and really be smooth as he came by and releasing the shutter, because at a 15th of a second, you have to time the release, time everything. It's not just a luck thing. People think like, okay, so cameras these days have a motor drive that can blast through 12 pictures a second or more. It's not luck. Like, there's no luck in photography. It's preparation, where you want to stand. It's all those things that really put together the ingredients of a great picture, and putting all of those things together leads you to a higher chance of success, if that makes sense. Now, of course, one of my favorite pictures, and again, you could do this 100 different ways, and that's what makes photography great. That's what's one of the things I love about motorsport photography, is I can send every single one of you out into the field with me, standing at a racetrack with the exact same camera gear, and we're all going to have however 700 versions of this picture and 700 versions of this race, because nobody is going to shoot it the same. We're all going to shoot at a different shutter speed, a different aperture, a different perspective. In this particular case, I wanted to show that the car is moving. I could have shot it faster, but I wanted to show that the car is coming in for a pit stop. And it really worked. And there's, I could have shot it at 1/800th and f4 and it'd be a perfectly nice picture, but I don't think it would have had the same power that it has as a kind of slower shutter speed 1/15th, where the car is really just still coming in, and there's just a tiny bit of movement with some of the mechanics, and the rest of them are frozen.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the coolest takeaway here is that balance between slow shutter and getting movement of the car, but it being just fast enough to freeze some of those other moving objects. Because I'm sure in those pit stops, those mechanics are swapping out those tires and refilling gas, in a matter of seconds. So those aren't slow moving people by any means.
No, you have to be prepared. Anything we need to hit before we move on?
Yeah, just a few questions and then we can continue going. Um, so when you're out on a track, are you looking to take photos of a specific car? Or are you looking to capture all the cars in that specific race? And sort of how do you set your priorities in some of the shorter races that are not, 24 hours?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, I'm not doing this for fun, so there are people that are out there paying me to do it. So they take priority. I do cover most races generally editorially as well, which means just a kind of a broad coverage. I'll shoot a lot of the cars that go by me, not all of them, but the ones that I feel are important or have a genuine shot at the race win. But other than that, I'm shooting my clients, which are paying me to be there. So I need to make sure that I nail them. And that's something that I really keep in the back of my mind is like, I can go stand at a corner and do, half-second pans, but I might not get my client. It's only after I've nailed my client and gotten enough of the pictures that I think that I really need to make them happy for that evening or that session or that race, but before I really go experiment and play. And it does take a huge effect on my creativity. Like I feel like my creativity has in some ways gone down because as I have more clients, you have less time. So I can't just go out to a corner and shoot, 1,000 pictures and maybe I'll get one or two. That's really the biggest difference between a professional motorsport photographer and an amateur motorsport photographer is, I can nail my clients at a 20th of a second. And move on to shooting something else or moving to another corner. Whereas, if you're there all day and you only get one or two pictures from a spot, you really need to practice more and refine more, like try and hit one car and hit that car and nail it with the sharpness before you can really call it like success. So, making sure that my clients who are paying me a decent amount of money to be there, make sure they're happy and covered is really the priority for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good point, right? Get the shot list, get the brief, knock out those shots, and then you can test out some really crazy slow shutters and creative shots. For those that are
Exactly.
not too familiar with the, some of these tracks, how often are those cars getting back to your point? Is it minutes,
That's a
seconds?
great question. Um, so, at Indianapolis, what's the lap time there? I mean, they're doing 140 miles an hour, and they're coming back to you pretty quickly. Whereas
Yeah.
the Nürburgring Nordschleife, I was shooting for Aston Martin 2 years ago during the 24-hour race there, and the cars don't come around except every like 8 minutes.
Wow.
So you can't be like, sitting on your phone because you're gonna miss your clients. It's almost a guarantee. Whereas most tracks, it's between a minute to 2 minutes where they'll come back around. With a 24-hour race, obviously it's great because they're just doing it for 24 hours. So you really don't. You're gonna struggle to miss your clients in a 24-hour race unless something catastrophic happens, which has happened. But yeah, Nürburgring would probably be the hardest race because you can't see them coming. You need to be paying attention all the time, and there's no excuses if you miss it because it's probably means you weren't paying attention.
Yeah. Or you have to wait another 8 minutes. So
Yeah, and those 8 minutes add up really quickly because if you throw a pit stop in it, it might end up being 5 or 6 minutes. Or like 13 or 14 minutes because you're just compounding a pit stop on top of a lap time, which is going to be an out lap and it's just going to be slower. So those are all things that I'm having to take into consideration. And, it really does affect your creativeness because I can't do, 30, like really, really slow pans when I'm only going to see them once every, 8 to 10 minutes. It's hard. It's really, really, that's one of the hardest parts about that race and particularly this job.
awesome. Awesome. Well, I'll let you keep going because we have a ton of questions, but we'll save them again, some of them towards the
Cool.
end.
So talking about speed and workflow, F1 is very, very different to sports cars, and the clients that I've worked with in Formula One is very different to the clients that I have in sports cars. With F1, you have to think of it like the Olympics, and I don't know how much you guys have seen with Olympic coverage. Articles from on various websites where they're talking about the pictures being loaded. When Usain Bolt wins the 100-meter dash it's up online within 10 or 15 seconds later. that's kind of how F1 is. We have a Wi-Fi connector that's connected to my camera that's then pinging pictures to an editor in England who's then editing those pictures live as they're coming out of our camera, and putting them on editorial websites. The race has started or this person has crashed. It's really important because F1 is a sport that's digested by millions and millions and millions of people, and they want that news and those pictures really quickly, and our clients want those pictures really quickly. Whereas in sports cars, it's a little bit different, where they want kind of just overall coverage, and they'll update as the hours kind of go by on Instagram, and Twitter and Facebook, and they'll just kind of keep people generally up to date, but it doesn't have to be like live pictures. So more or less how my workflow goes is I'll shoot, ingest, edit, deliver pictures, and then kind of rinse and repeat. During the 24-hour race last week, I probably spent about 3 or 4 hours in the media center, all said and done. And that includes editing time and ingesting time and falling asleep at my computer at one point. So having the speed to edit those pictures with really fast cards and really fast hard drives is really important now. I mean, this isn't, it's not film days where you can go out and kind of deliver a roll of, or a couple rolls of film to a client, 2 days later. The clients need their pictures very quickly. And that has changed our world a lot. And I've heard a lot of crazy stories from back in the day when, a F1 car would crash and everyone would just pack up and go to lunch for the rest of the day, and nobody cared. Now, you're still delivering pictures on site, and immediately. So it's changed a lot. Social media has changed our world a lot as photographers, but that's something that you always have to keep in the back of your mind, is planning your day as a photographer. I'm not just going to go stand at a corner for 4 hours. I'm going to move around, and I'm going to make sure that I have time to get back to the media center, dump cards. If I need to send something from my camera, I can do that, but I'd prefer not to. But social media has completely revolutionized and made our world harder in some ways, but also made it much easier and better in other ways. So again, during the Rolex 24, I'd shot 26,675 pictures during those 31 hours. So when you really break it down, it's not that many pictures per hour. It's less than 1,000 pictures per hour. But it does add up to a really big number, and all of those pictures are being dumped on my Lexar hard drive, my solid state drive, and coming off of the CF Express cards. And I have to be able to rely on them, because if I have a card fail, that's a big problem. If I miss the start of the race or sunset because a card fails, that's a big problem for me. So I'll shoot the pictures, and then I'll ingest them into Photo Mechanic, which is an incredible program. If you guys are not familiar with it, it's kind of the go-to for wedding photographers, and it's the go-to for sports photographers. It's something that I was taught on when I was at newspapers, but it can ingest high volumes of pictures and let you look at them very, very quickly. I know there are other ways to do it, but this is just my particular way. So I'll ingest my cards into Photo Mechanic, and then edit them in Lightroom 6. So you can kind of see which pictures I've chosen and then edited. I have all my settings here on the side. It's not crazy edits. I've just upped the contrast and blacks a little bit to make it how it looked to my eye when it actually happened. And then I'll deliver to my clients with Photo Shelter and Dropbox. Dropbox just for the PR people that are sitting in a pit box and they don't necessarily have internet. They'll get a kind of a social media res copy. And then all the high res stuff goes onto my Photo Shelter gallery, where they can pull it for whatever they need to later. Do we need to hit anything before we jump into this one?
Yeah, we actually have a few other questions. Typically for a client request, how many photos on average would they typically request? Is it hundreds, thousands?
So one of my favorite clients that I've ever had was Ducati Motorcycles, and they really, the guy that I was working for really gave me this insight into what the client, the ideal client that I have wants. And he told me when I was shooting the Pikes Peak hill climb, he was like, Jamie, we don't want, 1,000 mediocre pictures. We don't even want 100 mediocre pictures. We want 10 pictures that blow us away, really tell the story of this event. And that really resonated with me to a certain extent. Obviously, you still have to produce images and cover it however it needs to be covered. The number of pictures is going to vary depending on the race. So during a 24-hour race, I had a second photographer. My good friend Alex Wong was with me for the entire Rolex 24, covering my clients with me. And together for one client, we probably delivered over a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, probably 400 to 500 pictures. But that's a 24-hour race where you get a sunset and a sunrise and a little bit of everything in between, pit stops, garage stuff. There's a whole, it's not just the race cars and the racetrack. So that's kind of on the high end. For a sprint race or a Formula One race, our clients are getting between 100 to 150 for a weekend. But I try not to really duplicate the images too much. I'm trying to be more selective about what I'm delivering to them. And it's just an ongoing process. I'm still learning as much as anybody else is as I develop as a photographer, as I learn what the client wants. And each client is going to have different needs. And I'm very lucky that I've kind of developed relationships with my clients that they don't tell me what they want. They just say, Jamie, go have fun with it. You know what you're doing. We're paying you to do it. And if I have a client that says, we need 1,000 pictures that show the sponsors super, super sharp and it's, boring pans, I'm not necessarily the guy to do that. There's plenty of people out there to do that. But I would rather not be that guy. And I'm very thankful that I've developed those relationships with clients that say, just go have fun. And that's what they really want, is to have pictures on their social media and their marketing and their websites of, the car as I see it and the race as I saw it.
No, that's awesome. Those are really great tips, especially, it's so dependent on the end client. Of course, I think that's a photographer's dream, right? 10 photos from Ducati. But it's not just the deliverables. It's how many pictures, you need to take in order to get those 10 ones that say, wow. So
Yep.
Awesome. Go ahead and take it away. We're compiling some more questions for the end.
Cool. So this is, I guess, what a lot of you are here for: how to become a motorsport photographer. And the thing that, I get this question every day in various forms and from all over the world. And the answer is always going to be the same. It's pretty much how all of us did it. And you have to start going to races as a fan. You can't just say, I want to be an F1 photographer and not have any cars in your portfolio. You have to go to races. And like I said earlier, as a an American car racing fan, you have the best access in the world. You can, and without forgetting pandemic life, you can wander the pits, you can wander the paddock, you can basically touch the cars minutes before they set off on the race. The access trackside is amazing. There's really very little difference between what your access is and what my access is. So, you have to go to races as a fan, and that's not just F1 races. Go to anything that moves. Go start small. Pretend you're like an F1 driver. Lewis Hamilton didn't just show up as a 7-year-old kid and say, like, I'm going to be an F1 driver and go jump in an F1 car. He said, I want to be an F1 driver, but he took all the steps to get there, and that's karting and F2 and F3 and all the little stuff that brought him to the top. And you have to think of it the same way that you are an F1 driver or a racing driver. Start at the bottom and work your way up. You can't just say, I'm going to go shoot F1 and have zero experience shooting cars. It might happen, but the chances are more like much heavily weighted against you than it is with you. And then the other piece of advice I'd have is shoot it like you're working it. That's what I did when I started. I was going to races, but I would give myself a brief. Like, I'm telling the story of the race. I'm shooting from fan areas as best I can, but not just one corner. Go to as many corners as you can go to. And that's really the biggest thing you can do is, instead of having 1,000 pictures of the same car going through the same corner at the same shutter speed, you know, my client would laugh me out of the media center, and I'd never have that client again if I'm shooting, you know, 1/160th pans from the same corner all day with a beer in my hand. I wish I could do that, but that's not how you're going to get yourself clients. You need to shoot it like you're actually shooting it. So go as many corners as you can, shoot as many different things as you can, shoot the fan's perspective, shoot long exposures, shoot slow shutter speed, shoot high shutter speed. If you can walk around in the paddock area, you know, shoot the mechanics working on cars. You know, it's not just about the race cars. It's not just about a car race. You have to tell stories and pretend like you're working it, and giving yourself a brief is a great way to kind of be experienced. And also, as part of that, if it starts raining, you know, throw a trash bag on your camera, throw a trash bag on yourself, or poncho, or whatever you have, and keep shooting. I remember it stuck with me a couple of years ago. We had like 15 hours of rain at the Daytona 24. And I saw somebody's comment online that was like, man, that rain really ruined our opportunities for good pictures. And it made me like laugh. And it just made me feel like that's when the best pictures are to be had, is when it starts raining. I'm running out of the media center to the first corner I can find that I know is going to be absolutely epic. And I'm going to stand in the rain, even if I don't have rain gear on. If my camera is covered and my camera is going to be more or less okay, I am going to stand in the rain, because it will be worth it. And that's when you're really going to separate yourself from the people that really want to do this, from the people that don't really want to do this. And I'm not saying this to like, to you know, bring anybody down, but I get a lot of messages from a lot of different people saying, how do you do what you do? And most of them will never have the opportunity to be a motorsport photographer with credentials. But the way you're going to separate yourself and be one of those people that eventually gets credentials is to be a motorsport photographer and be a fan, but treat yourself like a pro. And that's kind of step 2 and 3 in this, is use your social media. You've got social media. It's something that, you know, humans have given each other to share our work. We didn't have that, you know, 15, 20 years ago. I didn't really have that at the beginning of my career. It was still all very heavily magazine and editorial based. So use your social media to your advantage. But also, you know, if you really want to be a motorsport photographer, don't have a social media full of like, you know, pictures of your kids and your cousin's second birthday and butterflies and rainbows. Like, if you want to be a motorsport photographer, fill your social media feed up with cars. And I have a private social media account. Very few people know about it, but it's, you know, stuff of my dog and my wife and my son and beach vacations, stuff that nobody in the world cares about. Because if I'm going to look at your profile, I don't care about your private life. I want to see your pretty pictures of race cars, if that's what you want me to look at. So, you know, be a pro. That involves, you know, having an Instagram that's very catered and niche. Get an email domain, you know, AOL.com, like Jamey Price Photo at AOL.com doesn't sound as good as JameyPricePhoto.com. So, you know, it's really, there's so many different facets to being a pro, but you don't have to be a professional photographer to tell people you're a professional photographer. I was not a professional photographer from 2008 until 2014. But if I saw you at a wedding or introduced myself somewhere, I was Jamey Price, professional photographer, and I wasn't anything else, even though I was selling alarm systems on the side. Or for the majority of my living, I was a professional photographer. And it landed me work, because suddenly it's like, well, this guy's not an alarm salesman that just has a camera. He's a professional photographer. So if that makes sense, like, really treat yourself like a pro, but you don't have to be a pro. And then, of course, as I've said before, tell stories. It's not just about the race cars. Go have fun with it. If you're not enjoying it, this probably isn't for you, because it's a really, really hard job. But if you are enjoying it, show how much you're enjoying it with your pictures. And part of that is, don't be lazy. Walk around, you know, lie on the ground, lie in the mud, climb trees, climb ladders, climb scaffolding towers, you know, whatever it takes to get something different. That's what it's going to take to stand out. Because, you know, we are very, very lucky that in motorsport, you have like if you tried to walk into an NFL game or an NBA game with a 500mm lens, you would probably be escorted out by the FBI. Whereas in motorsport, they encourage you to bring your cameras. 24 Hours of Le Mans does a fan competition every single year for photography. I know IMSA WeatherTech actively encourages people to bring cameras. A lot of these racetracks have like fan photographer guides, like here are the best corners to go to. Really use that to your advantage because car racing is very fan friendly with photography. I wish the camera companies actually saw this because it's probably the highest concentration of cameras and lenses in one place at any one time in the entire world. Even in national parks, you're going to have like 100 people at the Tetons for sunrise. Whereas, at Rolex last weekend, I don't even know how many cameras I saw with fans just in the grandstands. It was way more than 100. So, it's really cool. Use that. It's very special that we have that access, and they encourage us to bring cameras.
No,
So
I
that kind
think
of covers that.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
that's really good advice for anyone who wants to build a portfolio, especially in motorsport. It sounds like there's a ton of great access, if not at the local races, but also even at the major races, even though those ones are a little further away.
Yeah, the smaller races, that's a good point. The smaller races are a lot easier and a lot more accessible than the big ones are. F1 races, like I said, I love F1. I'm a diehard F1 fan, always have been. But you're not going to, unless you paid an arm and a leg, you're not going to have paddock access. You're never going to have pit lane access. You're just going to have, VIP access above pit lane, and it's going to be, messy at best. Whereas, with some of these other smaller stuff like karting, go-karts and track days and lawnmower racing, I know when I shot a lawnmower race, it was the coolest thing I've ever shot, hands down, bar none. And I didn't have a credential, and they're like, "This is awesome. You've got a camera. Come hang out and shoot as much as you want." So, don't just go to the big stuff. You use whatever you can get to, research it. I've had people email me like all over the place. They're like, "Hey, I don't think there's any races near me." I'm like, "Well, where do you live?" And they're like, "I don't know, Toronto." I was like, "Okay, I can name like 4 tracks, 4 races within 2 hours drive of your, hometown that you haven't named." So that's just kind of an excuse. You do your research. Google exists for a reason. Really kind of try hard.
We had a few questions regarding focusing. Are you using autofocus, back button focusing, and sort of what's your approach behind getting your images tack sharp?
Always back button focus. Not always autofocus, but sometimes it really depends on the time of day. I'll autofocus or manual focus on a part of the corner and wait for the car to come through it. And then I'll, fire off 2 or 3 frames as it comes through. Depending on how fast they're going, like at Indianapolis at 200 and, something miles an hour, it's wild. Like you need every single one of those frames that my camera can shoot to make sure that you get the one sharp, because the car's moving through that area so quickly. But most of the time I'll autofocus as the car is coming toward me. Autofocus these days is absolutely incredible. You're using digital cameras mostly, and you can really lean on the digital technology because it's getting better and better and better and better and better. Even since I started, autofocus is insane. So yeah, you can, whatever works, and the back of the camera exists for a reason. You can look and see if your pictures are sharp, and really, like, if it's not working, then try something else.
Awesome, thanks.
And I know there was the question earlier about getting credentials, and that's a big one that I guess I'll touch on real quick. So what I did to start when I was first, really wanting to get my foot in the door is you can't apply to any sporting event. Most sporting events will turn you away. Most big sporting events will turn you away as an individual photographer. You have to be working for someone. You have to have someone apply on your behalf. So that means you need to be with a website, a newspaper, a very reputable blog, a sponsor, a driver, a team, the racetrack itself. There has to be a reason for you to be there, because to be perfectly honest, it is dangerous, and this isn't something you want 1,000 fans just wandering around in areas that are just really dangerous. I mean, people get hurt. I had a friend of mine get hurt 2 years ago when a car hit him at really high rate of speed, and he's okay. But this isn't one of those. This isn't working in a studio where someone's bringing you Diet Cokes every half hour when you're thirsty. Like, this is really, really dangerous stuff. So you have to be prepared, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to have a reason to be there. If you're really interested in getting credentials, again, start going to races as a fan and build up that portfolio, and then start emailing local blogs and newspapers and magazines, local to a race that you want to cover. Doesn't matter what it is. If you're wanting to cover an IMSA race, show them the IMSA pictures you've made, and then, try and pitch it as like, I want to tell a story about this race, for your website. What do you think? Like, I'd love to work for you. Don't necessarily do it for free. My motto is, if a company or website or magazine should pay or can pay, they should pay. Where if it's like a really small local, like community blog type thing, but they do get credentials. You'd be surprised who gets credentials. That's a fair trade to just kind of say, I'll shoot, if you give me a credential, I'll shoot, but make sure you own the pictures so you can do whatever you want to do with them afterward, and be able to kind of, show people that you shot the race and you have experience, and you can sell the pictures either afterward or say, like, this is something I'm going to build on for next time. But they won't let people apply as, I don't apply as Jamey Price. I'm applying as, I'm working for a team or a manufacturer or a magazine, to all the races that I go to. That includes Formula One, IMSA, IndyCar. It doesn't matter. You're not there as a sole person. You're there under somebody else. Joey, I seem to have lost you. Oh, there you go.
Am I here? Am I back?
There you go. You're back.
Okay. We had another question regarding image rights. Typically for any clients, I'm assuming they would remain ownership, and they allow you to use them for your website and social media. Or what's the rule of thumb around image rights for clients?
So I own my images. I'm licensing my images to my clients. So my clients did not buy my camera equipment. If they'd like to buy my camera equipment, they're more than welcome to, but I think most of them would choke at the price of buying my camera equipment. So I own my images outright. I license them for a certain amount of time, whether it be 1 year or 2 years generally. And to be honest, car racing is one of those things that, as soon as the race is over, the sponsors are going to change, the track is going to change. They have a very short shelf life. So it's not really that valuable a year after the fact, because the cars that I was shooting last year are completely different colors, completely different sponsors. They're still valuable, but not as valuable. So that's a good question. I own my pictures. I don't, depending on if you're working for an agency or not. I know Getty, you do not own your pictures, but there are other agencies that you can work for that you do own your pictures. So a lot of my NASCAR pictures from earlier in my career, I do not own one single side of it. I cannot use them. I can promote myself with them, but I cannot use them in any way editorially or commercially. And after I stopped working with Getty and started working with some other agencies, and for myself, I own my pictures outright.
No, that's awesome. I did want to remind everyone, we do have the raffle still open. The form is at the bottom of the page. So again, I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to submit into the Lexar Memory Prize Pack raffle. Again, the form is on the Adorama page. We also have promotions going on now at Adorama. So Jamey, if you wouldn't mind just real quickly, just referencing that page for us. But CF Express cards, the 2000X SD cards, and a ton of other Lexar products are currently available for promotion, available now at Adorama, up to 30% off for some of them. So please
Yeah,
check
and
those out.
this is all stuff that I use in my day-to-day trackside work. Like if I didn't have cards and SSD hard drives to rely on, I don't know how I do what I do, and being able to shoot 26,000 pictures, I have to be able to rely on those cards.
Also want to open it up for some additional questions. So again, if anyone has questions, please drop them into the chat box and we'll do a quick Q&A and fire off some questions here with Jamey. Jamey, do you use any flash, or are you?
Hope I lost you. Flash, generally no, sort of kind of when it's really necessary. Like in this particular case, I do have a flash on my camera. That's me hugging my friend Mirko Bortolotti, who had won the 12 Hours of Sebring, and he got out of the car and it's completely dark. There's no ambient light. There's nothing to help me. So I am using flash. I don't really like using flash, especially with race cars. They actually actively ask us not to, because it does blind the drivers. So especially at the wrong perspective to the car, you can really hinder a driver's, ability to see at night. So when they get really close to some of the corners, if you're popping flash, at full power, it's really bright. Anybody that's ever for fun popped one of their friends in the eyes with a flash at kind of close distance, it'll blind you for a while. Not that I've ever done that to anybody, but using flash is something that we do, but I don't really use it trackside. It's all natural light generally, and just super slow shutter speeds.
No, that's good feedback. I know in rally car, in WRC, flash, especially like in the they're sometimes way out into the mountains and sometimes in heavy greenery and shrubs. And I know there's a flash could be somewhat popular in some turns. Of course, they're not going 140 miles per hour
Right.
into those shorter turns.
Yeah.
Let's see. A bunch of questions regarding focal lengths. Is a 7200 a good length to start with? Or do you always need the longest lengths? For somebody who's just starting out, and say they have a 70 millimeter or an 85, or even a 70 to 200.
Yeah,
I think it just,
that's a great question.
What's sort of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the 70 to 200 is basically in pretty much every sports photographer's camera bag. It's the one that I am using probably the second most. I think the most at this point is probably my 500 millimeter. And that's honestly just because racetracks are big places. I mean, as you can see in this picture, the car is pretty far away. I'm not shooting on my 5 here. I'm shooting really wide at a 14 millimeter, but racetracks are big because they want to keep the fans and the photographers and the drivers safe. So I do end up using my 500 a lot because of that. But the 70 to 200 is an extremely versatile camera lens, and a lot of the pictures that you've seen me present tonight have been with a 70 to 200. So yeah, for sure, it'd be one of the go-to lenses that I would try and pick up. And you can find them pretty inexpensive used, and that that f2.8 is a huge asset. It's great for portraits. It's great for candid portraits. It's great for sports of any kind. It's great for car racing. It's absolutely one of those lenses that I always have in my bag.
No, that's awesome. No, I think for a lot of people, the tracks are so big, and I think getting access to those larger lenses is always top of mind, especially when shooting motorsport. We had a few questions regarding inspiration. I think for you obviously you've been doing motorsport for quite some time now, but in your earliest days and maybe even now, who are some of the sources of inspiration around either your photography or your motorsport photography? Or sort of where does that inspiration sort of pull from? Was it within motorsport, or was it from outside photography styles?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that I really looked up to. I mean, obviously, I wanted to be a motorsport photographer for a long time, and the people that I really looked up to were, my friend James Moy and Laurent Charniot, and my friend Andy Hone. These guys that have been doing it for a long time. Jurgen Tapp, Drew Gibson. Um, Darren Heath, Vlad Reese. There's just so many guys that have been doing it for much longer than I have been doing it. Whoop, sorry about that. I don't know if there we go. But there's guys that have been doing it for a really long time, and they are really just inspirational for me. And I also look up to the guys that are not just shooting motorsports. Chris Burkard is a guy that I really like his work. I could really go down a deep rabbit hole of people that inspire me as a photographer. And I look at their work and I try and take something from it, but I also try and take it, make it into my own. It's not just I'm going to go out and copy what they've done. I want to go out and make it not better but different, and make it my own, and make a picture that I'm proud of but is different from what they've made, kind of building on what they've done. I mean, there's guys that were shooting in the 60s and 70s that really were the pioneers of shooting slow shutter speed. Rainier Schmegelmelch. I'm probably butchering his name, but he's just an inspiration to all of us as motorsport photographers, because he was really one of the first guys. Bernard Cahier as well. Paul Enrique here as well. His son. These guys were doing stuff with slow shutter speeds on film that I can't even imagine trying to do. I mean, I can barely do it on digital, and they not only nailed it, but they made it iconic and sharp. So yeah, I took inspiration from a lot of different places and a lot of different kinds of photography.
No, that's great. We have a bunch of questions regarding newer cameras available now in the market. I think in the last few years, we saw a really big surge in mirrorless technology and mirrorless cameras. Any thoughts on sort of where the state of cameras are heading from traditional DSLRs to mirrorless, and how that might affect motorsport photography?
To be honest, I haven't shot on mirrorless yet. I just haven't been given the opportunity to try it. It's not that I would turn it down. I'm not seeing, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but I'm not seeing anyone doing anything with mirrorless that I can't do with a Nikon, like the one that I currently use. So, I personally like the way that the DSLR balances in my hand. Some of the mirrorless bodies are really light, which is great if you're trying to pack light, but almost having something not heavy but balanced and really weighted is actually a benefit to shooting sharp pictures, because it's not as like front heavy with the lens and all the glass and all that. That's just something that I've kind of heard from various people that have tried mirrorless in a motorsport setting, but I would be very much interested in trying it. I just haven't tried it. So yeah, the technology in cameras is absolutely insane. But something that I always tell people, I get asked, every day, what camera should I buy? What camera should I buy? What camera should I buy? Honestly, it does not matter what camera you buy. It matters way more what lens you buy. And that's just my opinion on it. If you put, a really, really big engine in a Mazda Miata, you're still going to have a pretty fast car. If you put a really crappy engine in a small engine that has no power in, the nicest sports car in the world, it doesn't matter what it is. It's still going to not be a very fast car. And that engine is really your lens, and how much light it lets in, and what the quality of the glass is really the biggest, deciding factor in quality from what I've seen. Obviously, megapixels matter, but the quality in the picture really, you can really, see the biggest difference when you have big, like nice glass to compare to. It doesn't matter if you have the nicest camera in the world with not really nice lenses, it's still going to be, a pretty average picture.
No, that's awesome. We also have questions regarding harsh light for those that are shooting in midday sunlight, somewhere between 11 a.m. and say 2 p.m. when the sun's right above. How does that affect your approach in how you're shooting, cars, or, your position on the track?
Yeah, it depends on the time of year too. I mean, when it's winter time, it's really not ever that harsh or bad. In the summertime, when it's 1 or 2 o'clock, it's not a lot of fun. Heat haze is a huge problem. So I will either just pick my corners where I want to be and make it as front lit as possible. Because if you're shooting kind of backlit harsh, it gets very just kind of nasty. It's not to say it can't be nice, but it's a little bit harder. So I'll try and pick my corners a little bit more selectively. Or in the case of the Daytona 24-hour race last week, that's 9:30 to 10:30 was when I chose to take my 1 hour nap. So that was kind of the worst light of the day, to be honest.
No, those are really good tips. Some people asking here if you use filters, and I think you mentioned it earlier on. But any filter you use to help stop down that harsh light.
Yeah, circular polarizers are a big help. The ND filters can help a lot. And if I don't always have them on. I mean, a lot of times people are like, well, why don't you always have a polarizer on your camera lens? And the reason is I don't always want to see who's in the car. It does cut down glare enough that you can see who's in the car. And if you can see who's in the car, my client it becomes a picture of, Ryan Hardwick versus Pat Long, or just the car itself. So I don't necessarily care to see who's in the car. There's things you can do to minimize the benefits that you get with a circular polarizer. But I do shoot with it a lot when you're trying to take a stop or two out. I'll shoot at f/22 if I'm doing pans, but then you throw an ND filter on, and suddenly you're able to go a little bit slower with not as quite a high an aperture.
No, that's great. We're getting a ton of questions regarding drivers. What's the relationship like with drivers? Knowing that you're sometimes really close to the pits, sometimes in the mechanic shops, and sometimes in close proximity. Do you have any favorite drivers that you've worked with?
Yeah, I have. I've developed some really good friendships with the IMSA drivers because we see each other so many times a year. I mean, you're spending like up to 10 or 11 weeks a year with these people, and you see them a lot. We go to dinner, but when they see you around as a regular and they see your pictures I'm posting on Instagram and I'm tagging them, and it becomes a relationship where they not only trust me, but they know that I'm doing my job and I'm going to make them look good. But we can also have fun together too. And they can kind of turn it on and off, which is really great for me because, I'll point my camera at somebody and they'll just pretend like I'm not even there. And then as soon as I put my camera down, we can have a conversation and a chat and catch up. So the personal relationships come with time. It's been a huge benefit to have social media. Obviously, the F1 drivers are much more standoffish. They really don't like having cameras in their faces all the time. The more you get to know them, the better it is. But notoriously, Lewis Hamilton hates having his picture taken, even though he loves having his picture taken. He hates photographers. Just as a general blanket statement, he hates photographers. He's always trying to cover his face, so it makes it very challenging to get nice pictures of him. You know, Conversely, Sebastian Vettel really doesn't care either way whether photographers are there and shooting him or not. So it does help just personality wise that they recognize you, they trust you, they see you as an equal. They're doing their job, you're doing yours, and as a balance, we make up the paddock and have a mutual respect for each other.
No, that's great. Those are great feedback. There's time for a few more questions. Again, so if you have any other remaining questions for Jamey, please enter them into the chat now. While those come in, Jamey, if you wouldn't mind just showcasing the reminder for the promotions towards the end. Again, just to remind everyone, we do have promotions available that is available now live on Adorama. And this is the gear that Jamey shoots with currently. With his D5, shooting the CF Express. We also have promotions on the 2000X SD card. Very easy at checkout. Enter in these promo codes, and the discount will be taken immediately off in that checkout component and stage. We have a quick question regarding panning. Are those all fully handheld, or are you leveraging monopods for some of those?
So anything that has my 500 millimeter on it is with a monopod. Everything else is handheld. So I personally haven't been able to make it work as regularly with a monopod on my 70 to 200. It just, for whatever reason, it just the swing and balance with a 70 to 200 is more challenging with a monopod. But with my 500, it's too much weight. You know, I can do it for a couple minutes, but most of the time with my 500, it's with a monopod. I did shoot the Supercross races last year handheld, and it was really challenging. My back was pretty sore by the end of a race weekend, and you know, because you're basically holding a 20-pound dumbbell for hours upon hours upon hours, and your lower back starts feeling it. So I use monopods with my 500, but other than that, everything is handheld.
Awesome. Do you have a rule of thumb when exporting photos, and sort of what's your golden rule of thumb for sharing to Instagram?
I can't remember what my settings are. It's usually about 2,000 pixels at 300 DPI, but I honestly don't know what's the best export settings for Instagram. I kind of just did a quick Google and that's what I came up with. But I also don't want it so high res that people can swipe it and steal it and print it for their own home office. And I don't want to put 4K pictures on the internet for people to just have. My clients get those because they pay for them, but the rest of the world, I'd rather them buy a print or a digital copy, because this is how I make a living. This is how I'm going to one day put my son through college and go on vacations and all that. So every print sale and every dollar I make goes straight into my pocket where I can live the life that I want. And I'm on the road a lot, so yeah, having high res images running around the internet is just a quick way to lose money, in my opinion.
We had a quick question regarding workflow. Typically for a race, how often are you swapping out memory cards, and how many times are you heading over to the media center to quickly back up and transfer photos mid-race?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was working at Getty shooting NASCAR races, and this was in 2012 and 13, they would require us to be shooting on 2 and 4 gig CF cards at the time, and they were 2 and 4 gig CF cards because they didn't want you going through a card like a 64 gig or a 32 gig card, even though they were available at the time. They didn't want you going through like high volumes of pictures. If you had a card failure or just was overshooting, they'd rather it be smaller cards. I've kind of taken that into my own work a little bit, not quite as drastically as 2 and 4 gig cards, but I do use like 64 gig cards and 32 gig cards if they're available. But I think most of mine are 64s. And I know the ones you sent me, the CF Express B cards, are the 200 and something. So they're the big ones. But
Yeah.
I'll try not to fill them up, because if something should happen, if I drop a camera or if I like drop a memory card and lose it or something happens, whatever the case may be, I don't want to lose an entire race worth of pictures. I'd rather lose an hour or 30 minutes or a little bit here and a little bit there, because it's digital and you can never be guaranteed of anything. So I'd rather limit my protection as much as I can by shooting on lots of different cards. I have a whole memory card wallet full of Lexar cards that I'll kind of rotate through, and it makes it quicker on the ingest too.
No, that's great. We have a few more questions coming in. Probably time for maybe 3 more questions. That's a really good point, Jamey. I think for a lot of people, sometimes they don't have a media center to go to. So having a number of 64 gig or 128s, and then just swapping them out for a later backup or ingest is probably the way to go.
Yep.
Again, those that are asking about prints, I'm assuming those are available on your website, and they could find that through your Instagram?
Yeah, my website is jameypricephoto.com. I can't sell everything that I've ever shot because there are licensing restrictions to what I can sell and can't sell. Um, that's just unfortunately the nature of the beast with some of the series that I work in. So anything that I can shoot and sell is on my website. And then obviously if somebody, wants to ask about a particular car, I can always respond via email or DM that, and maybe or maybe not sell a print depending on what series it's of.
No, that's good feedback. I think we have maybe one or two more questions here. Let's see here. Again, a bunch of questions regarding if this presentation will be available at a later time. And yes, we will have it available in the coming days. I believe the team at Adorama will be able to share this to everyone who had signed up for the event. Any other questions? Let's do one more. Let's see here. I guess in general, how big of a business is prints versus you actually being out in the field, and how would you best approach diversifying your business as a motorsport photographer?
Prints is a very small part of my business. I mean, it's not that it's insignificant, but it definitely does not pay my bills. It's more just kind of like a little bit extra here and there. 90% of my work is in car racing and shooting for teams and drivers and racetracks and manufacturers. They're the ones that need the pictures for their own marketing use, and the licensing of those pictures to them and attending a race weekend on my day rate and all that is definitely where I make the majority of my money. The prints is just kind of a little sugar on top, if it makes sense. But again, I can't sell everything. I can't sell pictures from IMSA races, unfortunately, just because of whatever IMSA licensing, thanks to NASCAR.
Thanks to NASCAR. We have a few questions regarding if you're taking on any assistants or interns in the coming years.
Right now, no. I have. It's hard, and I get asked that a lot. And as much as I'd like to, it's just not really something that I can. Race weekends are really, really hard on me because I'm not just out there shooting for my own Instagram. The Instagram content and feed and behind the scenes stuff I do is really just the byproduct of me being there for really serious clients. And to be shooting for the teams and the manufacturers, I have to be able to trust the people that I'm working with. And recently I've been using my friend Alex Wong, who, is one of the best photographers on earth. And he's also a good friend. And we enjoy spending time together. So as much as I'd like to take on assistants and interns, it's just expensive to get people around the world, and insurance, and racetracks aren't always super friendly to it. People that are inexperienced at this, because it is dangerous. So I'll end up using people at the track that are friends and are already there, that we kind of help each other out. But again, if you're interested in getting into this and you want to take it more seriously and you want to get your foot in the door, there are ways to do it. And the way you start is just start buying tickets to races, and it's not that expensive. But think of it like an internship. That's your internship, as you go to a race as a fan. And there are agencies that you can then reach out to that do hire less experienced photographers to shoot. You're not going to get paid great, but you'll be out there with credentials with some of these agencies. But unfortunately, I'm not in that position just because of the clients that I have. They're needing me and Alex to kind of cover this.
Yeah, definitely safety first, especially given this line of work. But we're just at the 90-minute mark, and I wanted to just thank you again for your time and just sharing your knowledge with the community here. And again, just wanted to thank you and sharing your tips as well as thanks to Adorama again for hosting this. We are at the 90-minute mark, so we're just getting ready to close. For anybody that wants to follow up with Jamey, Jamey, can you just confirm again your social media handles and your website for anyone who wants to get a hold of you following this workshop?
Yeah, you can find me at jameypricephoto.com. My Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and all that is at Jamey Price Photo. And if you can, my name is kind of spelled a little bit differently, but Jamey Price Photo. That's pretty much, I've got the lock on most of these social medias in that same format.
No, that's awesome. Well, thank you again to everyone that's still here. Again, just reminding you to fill out the form. If for any reason the form is not available on mobile, again, feel free to email Adorama and you'll be entered into the raffle. We do have these promotions now live on the CF Express cards and 2000X SD cards. So snag those while the deals are really hot, up to 30% off. And keep an eye out because we'll be announcing the winner, I believe tomorrow. So I know the team at Adorama has a bunch of inquiries to filter through, but we'll have a winner very soon.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you having me, Joey, and I appreciate it, Adorama, and thank you, all of you all over the world who've stayed up way past your bedtime to hang out.
Yeah, some 300, almost 400 people here to the very end. So again, thanks to everyone who chimed in and joined us this evening. And we'll see you guys all very soon.